Hello, in this video we will discuss about the amygdala. This is the part of the brain, so remember which that is present in the brain, the limbic system part. So here I am drawing the brain which that contain a limbic system and the ventricles. This this is the lateral ventricles and this is the third ventricle and this is the hippocampus and fourth ventricle, and the cerebellum and the cerebral cortex is the higher brain cortex for conceiving the information and send to the different part of the brain for processing and the changes of the physiological function. And the amygdala is the integrative center for emotions, emotional behavior and motivation, emotional learning and aggression and fear. That's all things involved for the amygdala to process and control. So let's begin to understand the further diagram to understand where is the amygdala. So the amygdala is present. I'm drawing the yellowish color, which that is the amygdala, and the putamen nucleus and the caudate nucleus is here, and this is the cerebellum, and this is the pons. This is the amygdala, and the downside is the lateral ventricle, the inferior horn, and the upper side is the superior horn. And this is the caudate nucleus and the putamen nucleus. So remember, this is the thalamus is here, while this is the amygdala and yellowish color. And what is the function and how the input, the amygdala, the input things from the brain sent to the amygdala for processing and change the mood and emotion. So let's begin to understand with the input, the amygdala. So how to input? Here we will discuss. So let's begin to understand the limbic system, and this is the limbic system. The contain here is the thalamus. So remember, and this is the anterior cingulate cortex, and this is the cingulate gyrus, and this is the posterior cingulate gyrus, which has contain cortex upper part, and inside is the posterior cingulate gyrus, and this is the orbital cortex as well as the olfactory nerve bulb. So remember, so in this way here you can see this is the amygdala, while this is the septal area, and this is the hypothalamus. This all things basically is the orbital cortex for the visualization, the olfactory nerve which that receive the signal information via a stimulus to the amygdala for changing the emotion, for changing something, as was the case with the hippocampus fibers carrying input to the amygdala are in virtually all cases combined with fibers carrying outputs from the amygdala for changes the emotion. So remember, so the amygdala will change emotion like happiness, sadness on the basis of the situation which that is occurring in the outer environment, external environment or internal environment, for example pain or something. So here I am drawing again, this is the thalamus is also input, for input stria, here is the hippocampus, and this is the olfactory bulb because this is the anterior and this posterior view, and this orbital cortex also the input, prefrontal cortex also the input, anterior cingulate cortex contains cingulate gyrus also input, and this all things basically the input. So remember, so here is the septal area. So remember, and this is the basically here you can see this is the hippocampus. Hippocampus is used for the thirst and hunger and the tolerance. So the amygdala is basically receive the signal to change the emotion on the basis of requirement, for example, the happiness or sadness or other things. So the major output pathway of the amygdala, output, let's begin to understand. That was the input. But the output is the ventral amygdalofugal pathway, stria terminalis, direct to the hippocampus, directly to the entorhinal cortex, and directly to the dorsomedial nucleus of thalamus. So that is, so the amygdala major pathway we will discuss and divide into the three steps. Here is the ventral amygdalofugal pathway, and the stria terminalis pathway, and direct convection from amygdala is the direct convection. But the stria terminalis and the ventral amygdalofugal pathway is the nucleus accumbens involved, septic ventral striatum involved, globus pallidus, and the basal ganglia, anterior olfactory nucleus, orbital cingulate gyrus cortex, and the prefrontal cortex, and the septal area, and the hypothalamus. This is the septal area, is the hypothalamus, is the lateral and the ventral medial nucleus, and the habernula contralateral amygdala is involved for the stria terminalis pathway, while the direct convection from amygdala is involved the hippocampus, entorhinal cortex, and the dorsomedial thalamus brainstem also involved for it. So in the case of example, we will take the example through hearing. So when we will hear, so what will be happen and how the change of the emotion due to the music or other sad music or good music or other fearful voice. So this is the cross section, which that is the medulla, midpons, pons midbrain junction, and the caudal midbrain, and the upper part is the brain. This is the caudal midbrain. So remember, and this is the cross section we are taking that, and this basically is the anteroposterior view. So this is the cochlea, as contain a cochlear nerve, cranial nerve 7, which that is send the signal after the hearing, after the vibration of the cilia in the cochlea, which that will receive the stimulus, go into the ventral cochlear nucleus and the dorsal cochlear nucleus. So this nerve fiber will be divided and go into the dorsal cochlear nucleus as well as the ventral cochlear nucleus. So in this way, here is the cochlear nerve, cranial nerve 7, and in this way the basically is the after this dorsal cochlear nucleus and ventral, which that transmit the signal through via a neuron toward the midpoints, the trapezoid body, the ventral acoustic stria. This ventral acoustic stria is toward the nucleus of the midpoints, and in this way both sides will be covered, and that is why the one ear can feel the sound with both ear. So that is why, and these two nerve fibers also integrate, and in this will lead to go toward the brain side. So remember, we will discuss later, but here is the basically is the lateral lemniscus pathway through our nerves, and the basically the left and right, which that integrate for the equal voice equal sound feeling. So this is the intermediate and dorsal acoustic stria, intermediate and dorsal, so acoustic stria, and intermediate and dorsal, and the acoustic stria containing nerves which that go upside, and the inferior colliculus here, and in this the caudal midbrain, and this is the inferior colliculus, which that is transmit the signal in the caudal midbrain here. So caudal, basically the pons midbrain junction are present, which that contain nucleus of lateral lemniscus, which that transmit the signal to upward through other nerves after integration the caudal midbrain. And this caudal midbrain contain inferior colliculus, so the colliculus, which that transmit the signal to the medial geniculate nucleus in the brain. So the medial geniculate nucleus into the brain, and in this way the both side can be feel the sound. So that is why one ear containing head earbud can feel the both side of the ear can feel the sound. So in this way, here is the medial geniculate nucleus, which that transmits the signal to the brain. After this medial geniculate signal, we transmit the signal to the primary auditory cortex, And in this way, here is let's begin to understand the thalamus and the function of the thalamus and amygdala, which that is present amygdala. And let's begin to understand this is the auditory cortex containing auditory thalamus, which does contain medial geniculate body, as you have understood. So in this way, here it will transmit the signal of both nuclei to the primary auditory cortex. After transmit the signal to the primary auditory cortex, the thalamus also sends the signal to the auditory associated cortex, and the primary auditory cortex also transmits the signal via a nerve fiber. So remember, and the polymodal associated cortex get the information from the auditory associated cortex, and in this way thalamus also transmits the signal to the basolateral nucleus of the amygdala. So that is why amygdala is working like this. So what will be happen for amygdala also receive the signal, and the primary auditory cortex also receive the signal. And basically why receive the signal? Because here you can see this is the amygdala, which that transmit and basolateral nucleus, which that transmits the signal to the central nucleus. And after the central nucleus, the amygdala also transmits the signal to the nucleus basalis and the central nucleus, which that will change the behavior, autonomic and endocrine system, and the emotion response, the control system. While this nucleus basalis is also regulate the polymodal associated cortex, auditory associated cortex, and the primary auditory cortex. So please make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Bye.